So, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who's Denise Hearn. Denise is a former Calgarian, now living down in the States, co-author of a brand new book. I don't believe it's come out yet. No, but it'll soon be out, called The Myth of Capitalism. Denise is the head of business development at Variant Perception, which is a global macroeconomic research and investment strategy firm that advises the world's leading hedge funds and family offices. Denise has an MBA from the Oxford Saïd Business School, where she co-chaired the social impact Oxford Business Network, and as well has a BA in international studies from Baylor University. Let's all welcome Denise Hearn.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, home stretch. I'm so impressed. Everyone's still here. Thank you. And I want to make this session a little bit interactive. I love being interrupted, so please feel free if you want to heckle me or yell throughout. I love that. So this conference is called The Soul of the Next Economy. And it got me thinking, and I wonder how many people believe this is true? Show of hands. All right, a couple. How many people think this is like total millennial drivel? Excellent. Well, I have a few, left friends, and I kept seeing articles populating around on Facebook, ironically, on Facebook, that looked like this: capitalism's dead, now what do we do? We're envisioning a world where, capitalism no longer exists, the end of capitalism has begun, the pain you feel is capitalism dying, and these sorts of things. And this isn't an uncommon sentiment today in certain circles. But yeah, it sort of, got me thinking about the fact that actually, when you look at the last US election, we had Bernie Sanders, who is a democratic socialist, who gained immense popularity, but you also had Trump, who represents, in some ways, sort of he is the poster child for all of the ills of what we consider the worst of sort of capitalist society. But he also got elected with his base saying that the system is rigged and that globalism had destroyed American jobs and that he was going to bring industry back to middle America. And so this is really fascinating because in a way, both left and right were sort of saying, somewhat similar things that were very popular with across America and in Canada as well. So we're living in times of deep uncertainty about our economic systems and also about our political systems, and Lior also mentioned that in his talk earlier. And some even fear that democracy itself is at risk. And I found this fascinating. This is from the New York Times, and you can see, they did a study, and you can see that in many westernized nations, the percentage of people, so it's from the 1930s to the 1980s, the percentage of people who say that it is essential to live in a democratic system has been in major decline. What is going on here? When you have westernized nations say that it's no longer essential to live in a democracy, something is amiss. So we hear a lot of stats about inequality, about the 1%, and full disclosure, the reason why I feel so personally connected to this is because I am the 1%. Many of you have mentioned, and you know my father, who was an oilman in Calgary for many years, Tim Hearn, and I grew up in immense privilege. And my dad, I'm incredibly grateful to him. He was kind of he grew up in Saskatchewan, very, traditional family, worked very hard, worked his way to the top. Every opportunity that I have had is because of the work that he did, and of course my mom as well. But I got born into a system where I, right from the get-go, had immense privilege, not just economically, but I'm a tall, blonde, white woman. That gives me immense privilege. And I had health, I had a family that was secure, I had all of this. And even from a very young age, I felt very ashamed about that. And I thought, what did I do to deserve this? Well, the fact is nothing. It's, it was luck, it was my story, it was my journey. But I became very interested in the idea of how do we create equitable systems that create equal opportunity for the most people possible. And part of that journey led me to the Banff Centre last year, where they had a bunch of people from across Canada that came to the center that were trying to figure out how could we actually create market-based solutions that would address the fundamental structural drivers of inequality. And I kind of left that program. It was amazing, and I learned an immense amount, but I left that program actually with more questions than I did answers about what are the true causes of inequality today. And it can't just be as simple as the fact that we're paying CEOs too much. So this book that was mentioned, The Myth of Capitalism, and the work that I'm going to share with you today is sort of the culmination of some of that investigation. So this is my economic detective work to try to figure out what is going on. And I did this in conjunction with my colleague who is a well-known world-class economist, and so thankfully he knows what the heck he's doing. I'm going to start with a story. So this is Tanya. Tanya's a typical Canadian. She has a full-time job, she went to college, she owns her own home, and she has debt. Canada, by the way, is the second highest in the world for personal debt. Do you know who has more? Australia. Oh, I would love to chat to you about Australian housing later. But no, it's China, actually. So only China has more personal debt, and that's credit cards. We love our credit cards here in Canada, than any other country in the world. So so Tanya, she's got some debt, but she wants agency over her own life. She wants agency over her choices. She's also like most Canadians in that she is very unaware of the fact that true freedom of choice has almost completely disappeared from the fabric of her daily life. Tanya's Apple phone alarm goes off at 7 a.m. Apple and Samsung account for almost 81% of all Canadian smartphone sales. But she has made her iPhone unique and distinct by ordering a case on Amazon, which captured 44% of US e-commerce in 2017 and close to a quarter of all Canadian e-commerce sales last year. She considers herself environmentally aware, so she brushes her teeth with Tom's of Maine, which is actually owned by Colgate-Palmolive, which is a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. Similarly, Burt's Bees is owned by the Clorox company, and Naked Juices is owned by PepsiCo. After she brushes her teeth, she should have had her cereal first. I don't know why I did this, but for breakfast, she decides to have some cereal. So she, from Kellogg's, which together with General Mills and Post control 85% of the cereal market. She put some fruit on her cereal from the local grocery store, and it was grown with pesticides. And after 2 mergers that will happen this year, 3 companies will control 70% of the world's pesticide market. On a break from work, Tanya's craving a soft drink, and so she can choose from the top 3 firms, which dominate more than 85% of the market: Coke, PepsiCo, and Dr. Pepper Snapple. If she decides to make a healthier choice and go for water, she can also choose from 3 companies which own 9 out of the 10 major water brands that we are familiar with. So this diagram just gives you a sense for how many consumer brand goods and products are actually owned by larger parent companies and conglomerates. When Tanya returns home from work, she decides to have some downtime on her phone, and because she owns an Apple, she's running Apple iOS. The only other option is Google Android, so there's a duopoly with operating systems. And she logs on to her banking app, and Canadian banking is owned by the big... I thought this was like a well-known thing. The Big Five, yes, the Big Five. So there they are. And these banks have, in recent years, also been acquiring all kinds of investment banks and asset management firms to grow their assets to, fairly large proportions, even relative to some of the US banks on a per capita basis. So you've got essentially 5 banks to choose from, major banks. Thankfully, there's some great community banks in here, which everyone should go switch over to. So essentially, everywhere we have the illusion of choice, but that choice is quickly disappearing. So I just wanted to very, very quickly go through some terms. Everyone should be familiar with these. A monopoly, obviously, is when you have one seller. So Google accounts for 90% of online search. And so they definitely have a monopoly in online search. Duopoly is when you've got 2 players. So Molson Coors and AB InBev, they account for 63% of the beer that Canadians drink. So definitely support your local brewers when you can. And our favorite oligopoly in Canada, which I just found out there's a term for, Robellus. I thought that was pretty great, actually. So these 3 companies collectively capture almost 90% of the Canadian market for telcos. And I could go sort of on and on and on, but you get the idea. The story here is that more and more of our lives are dominated by mega firms. And the word for this is industry concentration, and it is the picture of North American capitalism today. So a couple of charts will help us to visualize this stunning concentration that we've seen, because how does this occur? I mean, you don't just wake up and have mega monolithic firms. They have to generally merge, or grow, but a lot of times it happens through mergers and acquisitions. So just going to very quickly go through some charts. Here are railroads in the US, so you can see on the left-hand side, I think it starts in 1960, and those were all the various railroad companies that existed. Now there are 4. Banking, this is your too big to fail in the United States. This is how you got mega monolithic banks that when the financial crisis happened, the government didn't want to hold accountable because they were too big and they controlled too much of the American economy, and if they let that fail, it was going to be incredibly problematic. This is airline mergers. So again, these are, I was trying to think in Canada, we've got Air Canada, WestJet, and that's it. Okay, right. Perfect. So that's an even better example. Yeah, so airline mergers also in the States have made, there's sort of 4 majors. Alaska has managed to get in there, which is great. But this just kind of goes to show that across so many industries, whether it's farming, insurance, this you can barely read, but there's all kinds of drug wholesalers, drugstores, administration of pensions. The market share of the top 4 companies often exceeds 60, 70, 80, 90% of the market. So across so many industries, this is the case. And this is fascinating. This is a chart by The Economist. And what they did was they analyzed annual reports. So every company every year has to write an annual report, talk about its business dealings. And you can see that they looked for how many times in those annual reports they mentioned things like competition, competitors, pressure. And essentially, now, businesses don't even have to talk about competition anymore because they have none. And so it's not even something that's mentioned in their annual reports. And I just want to say that it makes complete sense that firms have acted in this way. This is not because It's not because big business is bad. That is definitely not what I'm saying. And it's not because big business is evil and has it out for workers and consumers. It's because it's completely natural and normal, and this is exactly what they teach you to do in business school, is build a moat around your business, make sure that you try to keep competitors as far away from you as possible, and make sure that you can entrench yourself in a way that makes you impenetrable to competition. But the irony of this is that often what is good and right for a business to do, act in its own interests, is not good and right for the economy as a whole. And it ends up putting a chokehold on the economy in ways that are now starting to show up, like the fact that actually it's very difficult to start a new business. So we often think of, especially Silicon Valley or the US or even in Canada, we always like to, what do the politicians say? Small business is the backbone of our economy, right? But actually, new businesses starting is, the number of new businesses starting is at all-time historical lows right now. So you have to ask yourself, why is that? And there's multiple factors, but I think this is one compelling reason. So I'm just going to very quickly go through this because it looks very technical, but essentially this is just to show that we've had major merger waves. So this is back in the 1900s in the Gilded Age when you had Vanderbilt and Rockefeller and those guys controlling entire industries, and that was the number of mergers. This is where we are today. So we've had 3 major merger waves, and we've actually haven't seen this level of concentration since the Gilded Age. So we're essentially in a second Gilded Age, and I just find this really fun, so I'm going to keep doing that. I'd love to go into the antitrust side, but we'll leave that for now. So what? So who cares? I mean, so a couple of businesses, control our lives in every possible manner. What does it matter? Maybe people want to buy their Cokes. Maybe people want, these companies, they've become dominant simply because they've offered better products that we love to use, like Amazon and like Google and like Facebook. But the thing is, this is about more than just consumer choices. The average person feels there's something fundamentally wrong with the economy, and they're voting that way, and they're trying to say that they want something different. And a few funny things begin to happen when power concentrates in the hands of a few large firms like this. Industry concentration to this degree is bad for consumers. I won't go into all the research, but we've done a lot of work. It means you pay higher prices for things. The way that mergers go through is they convince the Justice Department, we're going to lower, the reason why we should do this merger is because we're going to lower prices for consumers. They're going to pay a cent less for that, whatever, than they would if we didn't merge. Actually, in case after case after case after case, when you go back and you look at it, all it does is raise prices for consumers. It's also bad for workers, because workers now, we have this strange thing where now the workforce is becoming more and more diffuse with the gig economy. How are they supposed to bargain against monopolists and oligopolist firms that have all this power? It becomes very, very difficult for workers to collectively bargain for the things that they want, like higher wages, better benefit packages. So this is very bad. The thing, or the group that it's actually great for, who do you think industry concentration benefits? Yes. Who's this guy? He looks so nice. I hate to knock him. But Buffett is a great example of this, because Warren Buffett, one of the most famous investors, billionaire, this is fascinating to me, and this will typify exactly what I'm trying to say. So for many, many years, Buffett hated investing in airlines. He thought they were a terrible idea. He said, no one should touch them. It's going to be the worst decision you ever make. Strangely, a few years ago, Buffett had a total change of heart, and he said, you know what, I'm going to buy in to not 1, 2, 3, but all 4 of the major US airlines. And I'm not just going to put in a little, I'm going to become a major shareholder in all 4 of them. Why did he do that? Well, if you remember that merger chart that I showed you, Buffett, his entire investment strategy is he looks for companies that have very little competition, that are essentially monopolies, and he invests in them because he knows that you can't touch them. And the interesting thing about airlines is, even though it seems competitive, okay, we've got like 4 major players, but what they've done is often they carve up regions, and they pick which region they're going to dominate. So they're sort of like cartels in that way. And so if you're flying out of Houston, you really only have one choice, which I think is United. So what they've done is they've carved it up regionally, and then they don't really step on each other's turf. And Buffett knows this. And this also was illustrated. Do you guys remember when that poor man got dragged off the flight last year, the United flight? This is insane. So United literally bloodied one of its own customers. And what happened to the stock price? For a few days, went down. People were, oh, it's so horrible, so shocking. How could a company ever do that to anyone? Then, once investors realized what I'm talking about, that these companies are so entrenched that they have no competition, the stock price actually went up. United finished the year better than it had previously. This is an example where a company literally beat up one of its customers, and it did better than it did before. Okay, and Buffett knows this, which is why he invested in them. And this is what we're seeing over and over again. And so, oh, and not only that, but of course as a consumer, on the airlines, you have to now pay for your baggage, you have to pay for like who knows what, they're going to charge you to use the bathroom soon, I'm pretty sure. So this is, this really only benefits one group of people, and that's investors. And this is problematic because but it also does show us and helps kind of explain why we've seen such dramatic increases in inequality. This is one explanatory reason for that. So this is a good Warren Buffett quote. There's class warfare, all right, but it's my class, the rich class, that's making war, and we're winning. Well, thank you, Mr. Buffett, for that. So as you can see here, as I mentioned, this is a measure of inequality, the market income held by the top 1%. The US is in the thick black line, and Canada here is these two lines. So you can see that basically there was a period of time where capitalism was working very well. And that was the 1940s to the 1980s. That was my parents' generation. That's when you could, the social contract of going to school, getting a good job, and working your way up worked. And the evidence was a giant middle class in Canada that was thriving, that was doing really well. But something diverged in the 1980s, which is here, and that's where we've seen this massive rise in inequality, both in Canada and the US and around the world, but most dramatically in the US, but Canada's also not doing so well. The strange thing, though, and I told, if I'm going over, just give me the, this thing. But the strange thing about this is that we are living in incredibly prosperous times. Productivity has never been higher. Corporate profits have never been higher. So why is this the case? And you can see that, I'm just going to go through this very quickly. I'm sorry this is so academic, so many charts. This is what happens when you work for like a macro research firm. You look at charts all day. But productivity is really high, but wages have basically flatlined and stagnated. And then also corporate profits, which is the top line, are extremely high. The share of those profits going to workers now it's like a giant alligator jaws, where it's just further diverging. And we all know the stats about CEO to worker compensation ratio. So the thing is, this power imbalance is very significant, and it's very problematic. And taken together, all of this means that there are a few very large, very profitable firms on one side of quote-unquote free markets, and everyone else on the other. And so the capitalism that we have today, unfortunately, is not actually a picture of competitive free markets. The capitalism we have today looks like rising inequality, lower wages, dying competition, sky-high corporate profits, and CEO pay, smaller new businesses started, less choice, and highly concentrated political and economic power. And I won't go too much into it, but obviously the reason why this is also difficult is because once you have that level of power that's concentrated economically, it's very easy for it to also become concentrated politically, where the firms can lobby and they can make the regulators make the rules in their favor to continue to perpetuate their incumbent power. Oh, sorry, I thought someone was going to take me up on interrupting me. So interesting, a quote from G.K. Chesterton, which I think is fascinating, says, "Too much capitalism does not mean too many capitalists, but too few capitalists." And our contention is that capitalism without competition, without the ability for entrepreneurs to get out there, compete, start a new business, that is not capitalism. That's not what we envision for our country. That's not shared prosperity. That's not bringing innovation for all. Capitalism means the freedom to choose. And I am still deciding whether I would call myself a capitalist, but I think, we kind of say, well, what has capitalism ever done for us? My generation sometimes says that. Well, it's dramatically reduced poverty to its lowest levels in human history. Plus, I like my iPhone, and, I like all the modern conveniences that capitalism has brought me. So far, we haven't figured out a better system. I think we probably will. But I think the least that we can do right now is try to remember that we've been here before, Gilded Age, and we enacted policies, we enacted changes that actually did create prosperity for a majority of people living in our system. And that is entirely possible again today. And so thank you for doing the work of being here. I think this is such an important question. I think I don't have all of the answers. I guess maybe that'll be my next research now that I've diagnosed the problem. It's like, what do? I don't know. But I think there's lots of things that we can do, and I'll just end here. I'm probably going way over, sorry. But get politically active, support David firms, not Goliaths. Maybe cancel your Amazon Prime, and support your local businesses. That's important. Capitalism is you show up every day and you vote with your dollars. It's an election, and so you get to vote with your dollars on the kind of economy that you want to create, and you can do that in your daily choices. Also, if you run a business, how you support workers and help them become owners of capital is very important. So employee stock ownership programs, different ways of helping them become owners of capital is really important. And then lastly, just get creative and let's figure this thing out together, because we owe it to ourselves and to the next generations. And finally, a quote from US Senator Cory Booker, who, if I wasn't married, I'd be really into. So he says this, if you look at great human civilizations from the Roman Empire to the Soviet Union, you will see that most do not fail simply due to external threats, but because of internal weakness, corruption, or a failure to manifest the values and ideals they espouse. So let's charge forward from here together and figure out how we can actually create a more equitable and prosperous economy for all. Thank you.